Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture Albion Never Dies, the podcast which now has a website, albionneverdies.com. As I put together that website, I mapped out all the Bond films that I've covered, either as deep dives on the podcast, as a personal view on YouTube, or as a guest on other people's podcasts and YouTube channels, and I started to see which Bond films I've covered in deep detail, like From Russia With Love, and which Bond films I've never covered at all. That includes Live and Let Die. So now I'm addressing that issue, the fact that I haven't done an episode on this film before. But as always, with the Britishness of a Bond film, I'm actually going to cover the book in quite a bit of detail, and in this case, a lot about the circumstances that made this book so important. The novel is essential in the ascension of James Bond. John F. Kennedy famously made 007 a household name in the USA, but what made 007 a bestseller here in the UK years before? It was another global event. Heading towards the movie, that'll be the second part of this podcast, the 1973 movie starring Roger Moore, and I'll do that with a little help from my friends. Roland Hulme, a Brit who's been living in the USA for 20 years. He's a successful novelist. You can find Roland Hulme on Amazon, Instagram, YouTube, just by searching his name. Alex Lamas will also contribute, and he joined me for my last episode, a look at 007 First Light, the video game trailer that was recently released. I'll also have a word from Matt Spaiser, who of course runs the blog site bondsuits.com, and both Alex and Matt live in New York, where a significant section of both the book and the film are set. Matt is also co-author of the book From Tailors With Love. Pete Brooker is the other co-author, and I interviewed him in 2022 about Live and Let Die. That was 2.5 years ago. Yes, that is the speed of my podcast. I do analysis, I don't do news. So he will join me, and that's the last part of this podcast episode. So first, I'll look at the novel and what led to the novel becoming so important. Ian Fleming wrote Casino Royale first. It published in 1953, the year of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. She had become queen the previous year. The coronation was the next year, in order to allow for the ceremony to be well organised, well rehearsed, as it would be broadcast all over the world on television. This was in stark contrast to her father's hurried coronation in 1936, the hurry necessitated in the chaos following his brother's abdication. Live and Let Die was written in this kind of social milieu, this cultural environment, and it was written by Ian Lancaster Fleming before he'd seen the reviews of the first book. He did this on the advice of a writer friend, Michael Arlen. So Casino Royale and Live and Let Die, the books, are very much Fleming figuring things out on his own, which makes it so interesting that they are so different. Live and Let Die, the book, is probably more like the structure most people are familiar with from the films. As I say, this was Fleming figuring things out on his own, and with a close circle of friends. Later on, he'd be influenced by others, letter writers, critics, movie makers he courted, such as Alexander Korda, and of course Broccoli and Saltzman had come along later. The most famous example is, of course, Mr. Boothroyd, who wrote him letters complaining about the type of gun Bond was using and suggesting the Walter PPK as a replacement. Boothroyd would, of course, be rewarded by having his name used for Q in both the books and much later in the films, and Boothroyd met Fleming in person. So these first two books are unique in terms of their sheltered formation. And as I say, I find them really different, so Fleming was always open to both change and experimentation. Then again, both early books sold middlingly well. They were not roaring successes from day one. None of his first 5 books sold more than 12,000 copies in hardback until 1957. The events of 1956 would play a curious part in this, and Live and Let Die especially. Like I say, most Bond fans know that Fleming broke the American market when John F. Kennedy listed From Russia With Love as one of his top 10 favourite books. Not his favourite. From Russia With Love was 9th on that list. This was in the Life magazine issue published 17th of March 1961. I've met many Bond fans who know this. So far, I have met nobody who can name any of the other 9 on the list. The other 9 did not become bestsellers, including his stated favourite, and I'll say for very good reason. The others are mostly political biographies, hardly the kind of book the average man in the street is going to pick up after a hard day at work. It includes studious biographies of Lincoln, John Quincy Adams, and Melbourne, Queen Victoria's first Prime Minister. This work by David Cecil was said to be his favourite. There is one other novel, The Red and the Black by Stendhal, published in 1830. It's a satirical portrayal of French society after Waterloo. None of these are really the kind of books to give a democratic president a man of the people image. There is a suggestion John F. Kennedy was told to add an everyman book for the sake of appearing more in touch with the voters. Fleming was definitely one he'd heard of, thanks to Fleming's high society connections. He did read Fleming, and he watched the movie From Russia With Love in the White House. It was the last film he watched before being assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald also read Ian Fleming, and in fact had paperback copies of 4 Ian Fleming novels in his boarding room at the time of his arrest, including From Russia With Love and Live and Let Die. Both are thought to have been reading Fleming on the night of November the 1st, 1963, the night before the assassination on the 22nd. So, Life magazine, the interview in 1961, that's how Fleming became a bestseller in the US market. He had sold before, but this is what made him a bestseller. So how did Fleming break into becoming a bestseller in the UK market? Just as a president launched him in the USA, it was association with a prime minister who made him a bestseller in the UK. Again, he had sold books, they were out, and they were pretty well received, but it's events in '56 that made him a bestseller. Now, his friend and biographer John Pearson says this is not to be overestimated. However, his more recent biographer, Nicholas Shakespeare, in his forensic biography of Ian Fleming, said this is absolutely essential. So, what's the event? The event is the Suez Canal Crisis, and I feel before I go into the Suez Canal Crisis, I'd better give a quick note on what is the Suez Canal, just for anyone unfamiliar. The canal connects the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea. Without it, any ships going to and from Europe to India, China, Asia, they have to go all around Africa. It's a vital shortcut. In 1858, the French diplomat Ferdinand de Lesseps founded the Compagnie de Suez to build this waterway. Construction lasted from 1859 to 1869, with the canal opening on the 17th of November 1869. The canal itself was owned by the Egyptian government, but European shareholders, mostly British and French, owned the company which operated it. That is, until July 1956, when President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalised it, prompting the Suez Canal Crisis of October-November 1956. The canal, by the way, has made headlines more recently. So in 2021, the ship Ever Given, a container ship, ran aground in the canal, 23rd to 29th of March 2021. It's a huge ship, 400 metres long, 1,300 feet, a 224-ton ship carrying around 20,000 TEUs. That's the 20-foot equivalent unit containers, the standard container you see being shipped all around the world. The container ship was buffeted by strong winds on the morning of the 23rd of March and became jackknifed, stuck. It blocked all shipping through the waterway. The blockage of one of the world's busiest trade routes slowed trade between Europe, Asia and the Middle East, tying up goods worth an estimated $9.6 billion a day. So the Suez Canal is not just historically important, it is vital today. So, the crisis. If John F. Kennedy's most notable foreign failure was the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the British equivalent fiasco would be the Suez Canal Crisis. It was an ill-advised military adventure by France, the UK and Israel to, well, from the two European powers' perspective, maintain control of the Suez Canal after its nationalisation by Egypt. Israel had slightly different objectives, but from the British and French perspective, they were essentially just a second front. As I say there, Israel's perspective is a bit more complex, so I will leave it aside. But from the British and French perspective, it's like the Bay of Pigs. It's beset by ill-conceived political military strategy, and it brought Britain and France no good. But here's a difference. For the US, the Bay of Pigs was a blip. True disaster lay ahead when the Vietnam War escalated, also a matter of the French handing over their imperial legacy, but Suez was a true marker in British history. And Suez destroyed the already fragile health of the British Prime Minister, Anthony Eden. He travelled to Jamaica for his health that winter, and this was on the advice of his doctor, but naturally it became highly controversial. Randolph Churchill, the son of Winston Churchill, published a book titled The Rise and Fall of Sir Anthony Eden, published in 1959, and it was heavily scathing of Eden, and this choice in particular. He's quoted as saying, "Even Hitler didn't winter in Jamaica." Where did the British Prime Minister, Anthony Eden, stay? Where did he do his remote command from? He did it from Goldeneye, Ian Fleming's house in Jamaica. Eden's wife, Anne Clarissa, the niece, incidentally, of Winston Churchill, her 2007 memoir is subtitled From Churchill to Eden. Eden's wife and Fleming's wife were friends, and this connection was absolutely vital in making Anthony Eden go to Goldeneye. By the way, in 1956, my father was in Cyprus, and he remembered watching the planes with paratroopers taking off from Cyprus, the tail lights visible in the darkness. Obviously, the lights would be switched off once they approached their drop zone. He remembers seeing them all fly off. My grandfather was in Suez for the Suez Canal Crisis. He was overseeing a depot and observed when the withdrawal was announced. Some of the French troops, I suspect unsupervised, started looting on a scale which he, a very, very keen sportsman, felt was unsporting. So he got some of his young soldiers, the French soldiers were nicking cars. That's why he felt it was unsporting. They were nicking Egyptians' cars and driving them onto their ships. So he got the British soldiers under his command to borrow a crane and start collecting cars and depositing them on rooftops. So the Egyptians could later retrieve them, but at least they would keep their cars. This is either proof of what a great man my grandfather was, or just proof that the first duty of any British Army officer is to scupper the French, no matter what. Dad's uncle, by the way, was most likely with the paratroopers going into the Suez Canal zone, although his career was in and out of various commando units, including the SAS, for whom he'd later be on the selection board, so it can be a little uncertain now to where he was at various points. However, it was remarked in the family that the soldiers who parachuted in had zero rules of engagement. Normally, at the start of an operation, the rules of engagement are outlined in real detail to officers, which are filtered down to soldiers, and they are underwritten by politicians. As I mentioned, the Suez Canal Crisis had very poor political military leadership. Back to Fleming, back to Anthony Eden. Nicholas Shakespeare, in his biography of Ian Fleming, states definitively, "What saved Bond was the Suez Crisis." This is in his book chapter, The Greatest Fiasco of All Time. At this time, Fleming was considering, not for the first time, killing off James Bond 007. Yes, the death of Bond goes back to Fleming, so when you say the movie should go back to Fleming, careful what you wish for. There was a huge furore over the Prime Minister. A very dark newspaper story dominating the headlines of the Suez Canal Crisis being an absolute disaster for Britain. And people had this light news story of, who is this novelist hosting the Prime Minister in Jamaica? It became a real feature. Huge numbers of journalists flew out and it dominated the headlines. I feel as kind of a light escape from all the darkness of rationing, foreign failure and the collapsing health of the Prime Minister. Who is this novelist who hosts the Prime Minister in Jamaica? Lord Beaverbrook offered to serialise Fleming's latest book in the Express newspaper, and he also started carrying the comic strip adaptation of the books. I believe the first adaptation of Live and Let Die were these comics. And World Books, a British book club, reprinted Live and Let Die in paperback, sales helped by lower middle class readers who actually supported the Prime Minister, Anthony Eden. Fleming became at this point a best-selling author. British power had taken a real hit. Fiction was the answer, and James Bond was the palliative. The complete collection of World Books Ian Fleming paperbacks, by the way, are worth around £1,000 at time of recording. They are great novels. but they were brought into the spotlight by the Prime Minister staying at GoldenEye in Jamaica, and then by the American President on both occasions due to Fleming's extraordinary social connections. Ian Fleming was, of course, the grandson of Robert Fleming, the Scotsman who founded Fleming's Bank. And if you're wondering where that bank is now, it was sold to Chase Manhattan Bank for over $7 billion in the year 2000. Reportedly, roughly 130 Fleming family members received close to $2.3 billion for the remaining 30% stake in Fleming's Bank. If they're not always so interested in the Bond franchise, you can see why. They have other things going on. And by the way, this is a pretty close circle in all this. Anthony Eden is Churchill's successor. He was the first Prime Minister appointed by Queen Elizabeth II, the successor as Prime Minister, the leader of the Conservative Party after Churchill, and he was Churchill's Foreign Secretary during the Second World War. He was Churchill's deputy for 15 years, and he was married to Churchill's niece. That's Anthony Eden. Ian Fleming, of course, idolised Winston Churchill, who had been a friend to his father. Winston Churchill wrote Valentine Fleming's obituary in the Times after Valentine was killed in the First World War, and Fleming kept this obituary framed. Hero worship. If you wear a tie, a jacket, or anything else because James Bond wears it, you are doing exactly what Ian Lancaster Fleming did himself. He wore a navy bow tie with white polka dots in tribute to Churchill. The first edition of Live and Let Die has a quote from Winston Churchill on the inside cover flap, taken from Churchill's Thoughts and Adventures, first published in 1932. Here's the quote. "In the higher ranges of Secret Service work, the actual facts in many cases were in every respect equal to the most fantastic inventions of romance and melodrama. Tangle within tangle, plot and counterplot, ruse and treachery, cross and double cross, true agent, false agent, double agent, gold and steel. The bomb, the dagger, and the firing party were interwoven in many a texture so intricate as to be incredible and yet true. The chief and the high officers of the Secret Service revelled in these subterranean labyrinths and pursued their task with cold and silent passion." As these words were borrowed, or Ian Fleming said stolen, Ian Fleming sent Sir Winston Churchill a copy of Live and Let Die, 1954, first edition, and indeed this copy was sold in 2020 at Sotheby's, the property of a gentleman. It was estimated to sell between 50,000 and 70,000 British pounds. When it was sold, it sold for 189,000 British pounds, the equivalent of 254,000 US dollars. So this is a special copy of Live and Let Die, first edition, sent to Churchill with the inscription, "From whom I stole some words," from the author, 1954. By the way, Churchill does get a passing reference in From Russia With Love, when Bond's housekeeper refuses to call anyone Sir, except for the King and Winston Churchill. I've covered the circumstances of the book and how it became so important and a bestseller. I've not had the time to talk about one of the key plot points, which is the treasure of Henry Morgan, and that is my recommended rabbit hole. Especially, I'll give you a hand in this, Kay Hagan's The Spectre of Bloody Morgan, Ian Fleming's use of the pirate motif. It's available online from the International Journal of James Bond Studies, Volume 1, Issue 2, Spring 2018. It's a great look at Ian Fleming's use of the pirate motif. I really recommend it. As I say, I don't have the time to go into it. That's my recommended rabbit hole. For now, I shall start to head towards the movie. Shockingly, I shall admit, this isn't my favourite Bond film. In fact, it's my lowest rated Roger Moore James Bond film. It's no reflection on him. He is why I enjoy watching it, and I should say, I do enjoy it. It's one of my top 25 films. I think his first outing is a better performance from him than Brosnan's first performance in GoldenEye, or even Connery's first performance as James Bond in Dr. No. Maybe I don't connect with the setting, New York. But that begs the question, why do I connect with Bolivia and Quantum of Solace? I've never been there either. Maybe I don't connect with the era. I don't connect with the 1970s. I wasn't born then. But then I wasn't born in the 50s and 60s, and I love that era of film and television. Maybe it's because of their focus on blaxploitation. That's really not my interest, but then again, I don't watch a huge amount of East Asian cinema, but I love The Man with the Golden Gun. I am contradictory, but some films connect and some don't. You can check out my 007 Rankings podcast for where this fits overall, but as Joe Darlington, from the podcast Being James Bond, says, it's like sex and pizza. Even when it's not the best, it's still pretty good. So, as I move towards the movie, I'll have a little help from Roland Hulme, Alex Lamas, Matt Spaiser and Peter Brooker, who I think really do love this film. And if I was to recommend some books, well, sources at any rate, Some Kind of Hero by Matthew Field and A.J. Chowdhury, that's the very best guide to the making of it, from the studio politics, the writing, filming, editing, and the release of it. I really recommend this book. It's a short chapter, more informational than many other books. There are, of course, the old DVD extras. I've seen them all. It's entertainment in itself, especially some of the old Roger Moore TV special segments. It's light and it's entertaining, and much the same could be said for the 007 Diaries. Sir Roger himself gives the inside track on what it was like to become James Bond. And I'll read an excerpt from that later on. But first, I mentioned blaxploitation. I'd really like to bring in Roland Hulme here to talk about the race question. Roland is a British novelist, and he lends me his unique perspective, a key point for many when reading the book, and it's also presented in the movie.
Hi guys, I'm Roland Hulme, and I write adventure stories and romance novels. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about Live and Let Die, which is a book and a film that I have very particular feelings about. If you know me at all, you probably know that I'm the guy who had the big petition against Ian Fleming publications a few years ago because they were censoring the James Bond books. And the book that got censored the most was Live and Let Die, which was the second book in the James Bond series. It was actually a book that got censored and had edits made to it right when it was published in Ian Fleming's lifetime, because he said certain things that were considered inappropriate to an American audience, and also he got some factual details like the colour scheme of certain railroad businesses wrong. But it's always been a really contentious book, especially when it comes to race. And what I think everybody misses out on when they talk about this book is how Ian Fleming had a unique experience and a unique perspective when he visited America and wrote Live and Let Die. And I, as an Englishman who's lived in America for 20 years, also have a unique experience, which I think makes me understand why the book was written the way it is, and why, in so many ways, it's almost valuable to leave it uncensored. And that is the fact that you have to understand all of the James Bond books that Ian Fleming wrote were about exotic places and him going to exotic new places. And in the 1950s, New York was exotic. And the thing that was most exotic about it, perhaps, was the fact that black people in America were basically Americans, the same as white people. You had black communities that were incredibly prosperous and abundant. Black people had American accents. Black people drove American cars. They wore American clothes. They drank Coca-Cola. You have to understand that to be black in America in the 1950s was still to be American. And for someone like Ian Fleming, who had been, born and raised in the British Empire, and who wrote about, Quarrel in Jamaica, his relationship with James Bond was like a gamekeeper to his laird. There was always this idea that black people were subservient to white people. And then to go to America, what is so exotic and strange to Ian Fleming was the fact that black people were Americans. There was no differentiation between those things. And what he writes about, and the fruity language he uses, the N-word, which of course we don't allow these days, it was an accurate representation of how people talked in that time. And it must have been amazing to him, and that's what the book represents, an accurate example of what was going on in America at that time.
Thank you very much to Roland Hulme. You can find him on Instagram, YouTube, just Google him to find his various bookseller profiles. I really appreciate his perspective. He's British, married to an American, living in the USA. I am British, married to an American, living in the UK. Our perspectives naturally contrast, and I hope build together a great picture of transatlantic issues. Certainly I really enjoy that. He talks about race. Ian Fleming's Diamonds Are Forever, written in 1955, just before the US hardback publication of Live and Let Die, has this passage. Bond had a natural affection for coloured people, but he reflected how lucky England was compared with America, where you had to live with a colour problem from your school days up. Fleming had not dealt with the colour issue when growing up. The Empire Windrush brought the first significant number of Caribbean immigrants to the UK June 2nd, 1948. There were 1,027 passengers plus 2 stowaways, and whilst they were from all over the world, those from the Caribbean were a significant proportion of the passengers. Now, there had obviously been black people in the UK before. The first Member of Parliament with black African descent was James Townsend. So he was elected to Westminster in 1767. He held the seat of Westlow in Cornwall until 1774. He was later Lord Mayor of London in 1772, and he became a Member of Parliament a second time in 1782 for Calne. Just one notable example, and it has become an increasing field of historical inquiry and scholarship, TV documentaries and so on. The Black British experience in recent years has become more and more studied, but these are interesting individuals rather than significant communities. Roland is absolutely right in highlighting the important difference between concepts of others, far, far away, and concepts of countrymen living in neighbourhoods very, very close by. I recently came across one of my father's old photos from Eltham. Eltham is a boarding school in London, not Eton, Eltham. It's a school for the sons of missionaries and army officers, he being the latter. And I looked at a schoolhouse photo from November 1963. There's 85 boys ranging from ages of about 12 and 13 to maybe 16 or 17, and mixed in among all the white faces are 4 black boys and 2 East Asian. They're not sitting in a particular area, they're just dotted in among them. I asked my dad about them. He has no strong recollection of them, which is perhaps unsurprising, as it was more than 60 years ago. I don't think they were in his year, just to look at them and where they're seated. And he went to many, many schools. I would suggest that if you're going to Eltham, which is a fee-paying school, class would be the greater determiner of their lives in the UK rather than race. It's not to suggest race would be a total irrelevance at all times, but it's just to suggest that in the rich and varied cocktail of life, one element would be more strongly favoured at most times than the other. My mother also recalls, in a well-to-do part of London, the occasional exotic, different in a way that we don't hate, exotic person. But again, it's individuals rather than significant communities. Again, as Roland Hulme says, this is a significant difference. In fact, this was noted by the publisher. 15th of May, 1953, Jonathan Cape wrote a letter to Ian Fleming regarding the first submitted draft of Live and Let Die, and said, "What I particularly like is the Bond's eye view of America. It's very rare nowadays to get any kind of book with fresh observation of the ordinary or extraordinary details of American life by an English eye." He adds later on, "I hope there won't be too much wet blanketry in other quarters." I've taken that from The Man with the Golden Typewriter, a book edited by Fergus Fleming, Ian Fleming's nephew, published 2015. I think one of the interesting differences gets into, film and race and kissing Rosie. Rosie, the character in Live and Let Die, she is black, Roger Moore is white, they kiss. Unlike the situation in the United States, interracial kisses, European white and African or Caribbean black, or Middle Eastern, Asian, whatever, in British films and television shows, attracted relatively little comment in the 50s. So the first example that most people seem to agree on might be 1954's movie The Seekers, in which a European, played by Jack Hawkins, kisses a Maori, played by Elia Raki. That's thought to be the first example of an interracial kiss in a British film. For a long time, the first interracial kiss on British television was thought to have occurred during the popular British soap opera Emergency Ward 10 in 1964. Yes, that is ahead of Star Trek. Again, just on my previous observation that the Doctor was black, but he was a doctor under the British system, suggesting certain UK class social standing. And I personally wonder if it would be different If he was a doctor under another European system, Spanish, Portuguese or Russian, if that would have caused a fuss. The actress who played the nurse was Joan Hooley, and she was interviewed by the BBC World Service for an article then titled First Interracial Kiss on TV. That was published in 2015, and she was quoted as saying, "A lot of people spoke about it more than 10 years later than they did at the time it was happening. So it was much later that it occurred to me that I was part of history. I find it odd to admit that I was part of history because I don't see why there should be anything to do about it. I don't think there should have been all this fuss about it. In fact, there wasn't a huge amount written about it at the time, and it's now thought that the 1955 BBC production of Othello had the first interracial kiss on British television. There were several kisses between Gordon Heath and Rosemary Harris. Othello is, of course, written by Shakespeare to be black, so it makes sense. And then in November 2015, Granada's Play of the Week, You in Your Small Corner was uncovered, which was originally broadcast in 1962, and that led to the rediscovery of another play featuring the same young Jamaican actor Lloyd Record called Hot Summer Night, and that was televised in Britain 1st of February 1959. So again, it wasn't such a big issue here in the UK, interracial kissing, as it was in the United States, but that's because our social environment was so very, very different. I mentioned earlier that one of my favourite books on the making of Bond films generally is Some Kind of Hero, and this states that originally Solitaire was going to be black. She is, of course, white in the novel, but times from the 50s to the early 70s had changed. She was going to be black. Her race was changed back to white at the behest of the American studio. They said, with Connery, maybe they could have taken a risk. Maybe they could have kept her black. But a new actor, in his debut, in the US market, just the new actor was enough of a risk. And so you get the character Rosie being added in. The director of the movie, Guy Hamilton, has said in quite a few interviews he was told by the American distributors that Bond could only kiss the lightest-skinned black woman they could find, and for the shortest possible time, and so he delighted in finding the darkest-skinned actress he could find and filming a long love scene in which they do reference what we've just done. They withheld the rushes from the US distributor until it was far, far, far too late to change. By the way, Roger Moore writes entertainingly about shooting this scene in the 007 diaries, and the lady, Gloria Hendry, has spoken of it in a wide range of highly entertaining interviews. I won't recommend one, because they're all easy enough to find, and all of them show her infectious sense of fun. I'm tempted to offer £10 to anyone who finds a boring interview with her, but of course that's an extremely tough challenge, and it's extremely subjective, what's stolen and what's not, so I think I'll leave that one for now and just say all the interviews with her are great fun. I mentioned the book, the 007 Diaries, so I'll read a section from it as Roger Moore talks about becoming James Bond. In his words, which I've slightly edited just for the purpose of this podcast. They say when death is imminent, your entire life flashes in front of your eyes. The only thing flashing before my eyes was a large corrugated iron shed, sticking up out of the Louisiana bayou, which I was approaching at a fair old 60 miles an hour in an out-of-control boat. I knew I was going to hit it, and there was nothing I could do about it. I wound up in a heap on the floor, clutching my mouth, my knee throbbing, my shoulder numb, and what felt like 54,000 teeth in my mouth, all at once being slowly mangled up into little bits of gravel. Here I was, just about to start playing James Bond with no teeth. How on earth did I get myself into such a situation? It began on Sunday, 8th of October 1972, when, as the new James Bond, I left England in a blaze of publicity for the first location in New Orleans. We flew via New York. Our occasion in New York, where an elegant suite at the Sherry Netherland awaited us, was, what can one say? It was Bond style. Early next morning, Arthur McGee, the American costume consultant, took me out shopping to find some casual outfits for the film. It was Columbus Day. Rather apt for me, as Columbus was a man who didn't know where he was going, and when he got there didn't know where he was. All we did was dodge the Columbus Day parade. He then further describes getting a dirty brown Levi's suit. New Orleans, they say, is different. We arrived, we agreed, it is. My wife Louisa and I felt straight away. It is a different scene, and it is even a different kind of heat. We are staying at a beautiful hotel in the French Quarter called, appropriately enough, the French Quarter Inn. Wednesday morning began with a rehearsal on the Irish Bayou for the 15-minute chase sequence, a highlight of Live and Let Die. I practiced taking a boat fast, at 20, then 30, then 40, then 50, then 60 miles an hour, round sharp U-bends. These are not ordinary outboard engine powerboats, they are jets. The steering can only be controlled when the motor is turning. 3 times we made the same sharp bend, and 3 times the engine cut out and picked up again. As we came around for the 4th time, I said to the instructor with me in the boat, "I wonder if it will cut out again." Well, I pushed my luck, and it did, and this time it didn't pick up again. We limped back to shore with a badly holed boat and likewise body. I was piled into a car, still in my swimming shorts, and driven back to New Orleans. My teeth, I felt, were the most important, so I saw a dentist first. A quick x-ray showed a fractured front tooth, which was by then hurting like mad. Then I was carted off to a clinic, where the doctor gave me the good news that my leg wasn't broken, and Louisa gave me the bad news that my pants were dirty. After what I'd just gone through, I wasn't in the least bit surprised. I was then taken back to my hotel to reflect on the day's battle scars. Thursday's mail brought an offer from Cosmopolitan to be their centre-page pin-up for the June issue to coincide with the opening of Live and Let Die. Fame at last. Me to be the bunny for the liberated ladies. Needless to say, I was not about to pose in the Altogether. When I first knew I was going to do Bond, Harry Saltzman, who co-produces the Bond series with Cubby Broccoli, said it must be kept top secret, that he wanted to meet the director, Guy Hamilton, away from the office, where we would not be seen. We met at Scott's in Mayfair in true Bond style over a dozen oysters and martinis. I confessed to Guy that in reading the script I could only hear Sean's voice saying, "My name is Bond." In fact, as I vocalised to myself, I found that I was giving it a Scottish accent. Guy said, "Look, Sean was Sean, and you are you, and that is how it's going to be." So, we mentioned New York very, very briefly. I'd now like to hear from an expert in New York, Alex Lamas, who I interviewed for the 007 First Light video game, and whose channels are like Instagram's, Sifu Lamas, and YouTube's always say yes to adventure. Alex is a martial arts expert. He did a video on the fighting style of James Bond and an interview with a Royal Navy frogman, which are well worth checking out. But here he talks about the balance of light and dark in this film and how New York is portrayed.
Live and Let Die. It's not the first James Bond film I ever saw. That would have been Thunderball. And it's not the first Roger Moore Bond film I ever saw. That would have been The Spy Who Loved Me. However, it is one of my favorite James Bond films and definitely one of my favorite Roger Moore Bond films. Not only because part of it takes place in New York City, where I grew up as a kid, but that it has a perfect blend of both cheeky fun and dark grittiness. Now, I'm more of a fan of the Timothy Dalton, Daniel Craig Bond films. I like James Bond to be sort of dark and menacing. I like the grittiness of those movies. Although I love Roger Moore, some of his films got a bit too lighthearted for me for a James Bond film. However, this film, Live and Let Die, has a perfect balance of both the dark and the lightheartedness, which a good James Bond film should have. The other thing is that I grew up around a lot of the locations that are depicted in that film, and seeing New York City at that time was not the New York City that I knew. New York City in the 1970s, and especially in the 80s when I was growing up, was a far more menacing, a far more dangerous, a far more gritty place than is depicted in that movie. And the way they show New York City is probably in its best light. For a more accurate depiction of New York City at that time, you have to see movies like The French Connection. However, seeing New York City the way it's depicted in Live and Let Die, I don't know if I could say I'm proud of it, but it does make me feel a lot better about my childhood and growing up there, because the reality was far different. It was a very, very crazy, dangerous place at that time. So Live and Let Die, for that reason, will always hold a special place in my heart.
Thank you very, very much to Alex Lamas. He mentions The French Connection, 1971 movie starring Gene Hackman, which shows a very, very different and very violent side of New York. It earned 8 Academy Award nominations and won 5 Oscars: Best Picture, Director, Actor, Adapted Screenplay, and Film Editing. It's not a jolly watch, but it is well worth a watch when you're in the right mood for a gritty neo-noir thriller. Currently, in the UK, it's on Disney+, which I find quite incongruous, but well worth a watch. And interesting that the British filmmakers must have seen this Oscar-winning movie and thought, nope, Bond is different. Just on James Bond in New York, Live and Let Die has its amusing jazz tour of New York in the 1954 book, with controversies starting from its American publication, editing, and recent reissuing with edits. As Roland says, Fleming comments on what is exotic to himself and many UK readers, which makes it what it is, a time capsule. It's what makes it so interesting. Some find that very, very uncomfortable. I happen to accept that any book is an interesting exploration of an author's point of view, and if it was my own point of view, I'd probably find it quite dull to read. Fleming returns to New York for Thrilling Cities, a series of newspaper articles first published in 59 and 60, and has the quote, "I enjoyed myself least of all in New York." In compensation for his grim article on New York, almost as an apology to his American readers, he wrote a very, very short adventure of, quote, "a friend of mine with the dull name of James Bond, whose taste and responses are not always my own. It does prove much more cheerful, and it has Ian Fleming's housekeeper's recipe for scrambled eggs, his love of which is apparent all across his James Bond novels and short stories." Now we'll hear from Matt Spaiser about the striking fashion of Live and Let Die. I've mentioned From Tailors With Love and no shortage of Bond podcasts and YouTube videos. It really is, by far and away, the very, very best possible guide to anything James Bond wears.
My name is Matt Spaiser. Live and Let Die is a very personal Bond film for me because I live just around the corner from where they filmed The Voodoo Shop. It's a wonderful thing to have a Bond location right outside my door. It's been a great place to meet up with other Bond fans. And as a fan of James Bond's tailoring, the coat he wears makes this scene only more special. It's a double-breasted navy Chesterfield coat with a velvet collar and gauntlet cuffs. It's Roger Moore's first tailored look of the entire series. I like that it establishes Moore as a Bond who appreciates classic British tailoring, which is a bit funny considering how Moore became known for his 1970s fashions with the wide lapels and the flared trousers. I don't yet have this coat myself, but I do have a shirt made after this one by the same shirt maker who made Roger Moore's, Frank Foster, and it has the same cocktail cuffs, the same fly front that Roger's shirt has. You can find me at bondsuits.com, at bondsuits on Instagram and other social channels. You can also find the book I co-wrote with Peter Brooker, From Tailors With Love, An Evolution of Menswear Through the Bond Films.
Thank you very, very much once again to Matt, and again, do check out Matt Spaiser's blog, bondsuits.com. And now, the main interview with the co-author, Pete Brooker, recorded a couple of years ago, 2.5, I think. I hope you find it worth the wait. I very much enjoyed recording this, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. Thank you, Pete Brooker.
Yep. Okay, Pete Brooker from Tailors With Love. Thank you very, very much for joining me.
Thank you, Thomas, for this. Wow, what a surprise, but very flattered to be here.
And today we're talking about Live and Let Die.
Live and Let Die. I wish I was wearing something Live and Let Die related, but I do feel like this is one of my favourite films of all time. It's certainly my favourite Bond film, and maybe my favourite stylish Roger film. But there's obviously Golden Gun, and Octopussy, which I have a penchant for.
I can see you're wearing a Thunderball style shirt at the moment.
Yes, I am. So I'm wearing the pink camp collar shirt because it's nice and hot, and this is actually very breathable. And I'm wearing my linen trousers from grey flannel, but that is nothing to do with what we're talking about today.
So why do you love Live and Let Die so much?
So I think this was one of the first films that I saw And it's all like every Bond fan has that relationship with their dad, where they sit down and watch films with their dad, their family. And I always enjoyed watching him laugh at especially the crocodile escape scene.
Yeah.
And towards later on in life, when you grow up, and your dad, and you put on a DVD in a Bond film, and he'll ask me often, like, what's this one about? You know, because they're a bit of a same or a much of a muchness for him, and you have to kind of, rather than describe the plot, which can sometimes be quite hard to do, no matter how many times you watch a Bond film, you will just say, well, this one's about him jumping over crocodiles.
Yeah.
And in fact, and he'll go, I know exactly which one this is. I know what to expect. And so I always found, and I've taken that way of framing films actually to describe films in general. Like, what is this film about? What is Crank about, for example? Crank is about Jason Statham having sex in the street. What is Jaws about? It's about chopping Robert Shaw in half with a great white. Right. Okay, so I think Bond falls into that category. What is this film about? And then join the dots.
And it's influenced you quite a bit. So we're looking at James Bond, his part in Your Glory.
Yeah, definitely. So this film has influenced me. Well, maybe I'll touch upon the style first off. So I have had some shirts made by Frank Foster, who was a shirt maker for a lot of the Bond films, and I think a lot of your audience will know who the brand Frank Foster is, run by the daughter and mother. And the mother originally was a shirt maker for the Bond franchise. She's still there making shirts from the same bolts of fabric.
Wow. And
I just find that incredible and so unique to that brand. And I love going to the tailor as well, because they have their studio downstairs. It's very modest. It's not like a shop, like a Turnbull and Nasser, where it's visible on street level, for example. You can't peer in a window. You go downstairs and then you go down a lift and then you come out and you wander around a few doors. You're like, where are you? And then you walk in, and it is just a little Disneyland for Bond fans. There's posters of Roger Moore on the wall. There's autographed framed photos of Christopher Walken and the likes of that. And you have all of these yarns and bolts of fabric to look at and basically salivate over. And I remember vividly Sam, the daughter, showing me some of Roger Moore's patterns, the paper patterns for the shirts. And this was all at the time when I was writing the book with Matt Spaiser, and Matt was there, and we were, it's kind of hard to like put into words how joyous that makes me feel in a real nerdy way, to look at the original patterns and to look at the original fabrics, and then to ask if you can have a shirt made in this, and for them to be so kind and just say yes. And they're not commercial in any way, and I mean that. I don't know if that's a disrespectful way of saying it. They are obviously a business and they have to make money, but they don't advertise like, get the Live and Let Die shirt from the same fabric, and this now costs you 550 quid, right? So they don't do those kind of runs. It's a very limited. You almost have to be introduced by another party. A lot of the times, I'm not saying every time. So I think this was, again, so going back to the influence for me was, I am now glued into the style of Bond. I mean, before I was just the films, then I'm the locations, and I'm like, wow, I'm up Sugarloaf Mountain, this is great. And then it's, right, I now have to devour the books, because you can't really be a Bond fan and just have you don't want to get caught out, I found, right? Do you ever find this? Like when you obviously know the books in and out.
For me, it's the continuation books, right? Because I don't read those, so I get caught out when people talk about it. So I got into it with Fleming, and then I tried one or two of the others, and it wasn't for me. And then I do get caught out sometimes. People are like, you should really try this one. Which one did you try? Oh, that makes sense. You know?
Yes, yeah. So I'm like that a lot of the time. In the books I have read, and I go back and listen to them again on audiobook, but I've got a memory like a spaghetti colander. It's hard for me. We were just talking about From Russia with Love in Istanbul, and so I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so that does kind of... Anyway, so I feel like it's... The influence that this film has had in particular was cementing my love for the sartorial element of Bond, which was probably the last jigsaw piece to fall into place for me.
And we've walked past that shop, and it's I guess it sounds like an Aladdin's cave. I wouldn't have known about it if you hadn't pointed to the secret door, basically, that leads down to it.
Exactly. It's not even a door with a name, but a sign above. There's an intercom.
It's very discreet.
And it's not like you can ring the buzzer and go in. You'd have to have an appointment. So it's very... I like the clandestine way of the old-fashioned shirt makers, the old-fashioned tailors, and I think this is very much Bond. And the fact you have the original people there that made the shirts originally.
Yeah.
So I've had Mary, the mother who made the shirts. She made me the on the Majesty's Secret Service pleated dress shirt, that the beach fight scene. So I have that shirt. I have the Bayou shirt that Matt Spaiser's called it. So Matt and I have the same, or we have the same shirt from that scene, where he's obviously on the boats, on the speedboats. And I have the short sleeve black shirt as well for the scene where he's in the plane in the airport. And same time tomorrow, Mrs. Bell. So I've got that black shirt as well, that black short sleeve shirt.
And it connects you to that scene.
Right, yeah. And it's actually quite an important shirt, because I think, like we were saying about how hot it is here, it's easy to get easy enough to get a camp collar shirt, a linen shirt, but it's very, very casual. Something like that shirt that I have, with the collar, the upright collar, and with the quality of the fabric, it's almost a very, very formal short sleeve shirt. So I get to feel proper if I'm having, say, garden parties, or if it's a hot day, but I still want to be formal and I don't want to wear a suit jacket. Having the most smartest short sleeve shirt that you can have is definitely my go-to. Absolutely.
Which is interesting. You do wear this out. It's not framed. It's not in a glass cabinet. It's not in a museum. This is a real thing that you wear.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, I've got. I mean, I've now fallen to the idea that you have to get stuff messy and broke and stained. I mean, I try and take care of stuff, but I also don't lose my marbles when I spill stuff on it, because that's just life. I mean, you're probably the same with books, right? Books are there to be read rather than put behind glass shelves. So, glass shelves.
Inspector says it's the fate of glass to break.
Right, it's the fate of my shirts to get to get caught on a door handle and ripped to shreds. That is the fate of every shirt I own, unfortunately.
I had a shirt ripped just the other day.
Yeah?
Yeah, just a message to the tailor and say,
yeah,
would you mind making another?
Yeah, another one. Well, I mean, just going back to the shirt, so I have recently just scratched the idea of having cocktail cuffs. I love them because they're in the Bond films, and I want to get screen accurate shirts. So if I'm going for a Bond shirt and it's the right fabric from the right film, I will get the details as close as I can. So I will get cocktail cuffs. But they are a nightmare. I cannot get on with them now, because the idea was that you have them so if you need to get undressed in a jam and jump into a body of water with a knife between your throat, you can do it lickety split, right? But when you actually in real life, you're going out for dinner and you take your jacket on and off. I mean, I'm sure like Spaiser might be listening to this and going, no, you're not doing it right. You know, you don't have the cocktail cuff set up right in line with your jacket. But it does. Things kind of get caught in and out of a cocktail cuff, because it's not effectively fastened shut like a double barrel cuff or a French cuff. So I'm a mitered cuff man. Mitered cuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've got the For Your Eyes Only shirt. I know we're going off the grass here, but the striped shirt from Frank Foster, the For Your Eyes Only shirt, which is a helicopter shirt, which luckily is screen accurate with mitered cuffs. So that's my mode now. Trying to think of Live and Let Die locations that I've actually been to. I don't know if you've been to any of them.
No, I don't think so, not knowingly.
Yeah, I would love to do the Louisiana boat chase. I narrowly missed out on doing the Crocodile Farm, the Kananga farm out in Jamaica. When I was there, it was getting refurbished and they were actually opening it up on the day that I had to leave. So I was thinking maybe I'll just go there and then we'll just fucking catch the flight as it's getting off the tarmac, you know. I'll drive the car in as the plane's going up, like a la Ryan Gosling or something. So I didn't manage to do that. I'm sure I've done Live and Let Die locations though at some point. Anyway, it'll come to.
But mainly the shirts. You are From Tailors With Love. The book is out.
It is.
And a very good price. And
it is, yeah.
Good to buy and give to all your friends and family.
Yeah.
And have several scattered around the home.
Buy it retail. Yeah, that's the best way.
I think so. I think it brings good luck. So.
Yeah. Definitely.
Brooker, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete Brooker. and thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the overview of the environment in which this novel became so great, what made it a bestseller. I hope you enjoyed the journey towards the movie and the talk about the movie itself. I hope next time you watch Live and Let Die, all of this contributes to your enjoyment. Goodbye.